right, everyone. Welcome to the Node.js meetup. All right, so we have a couple of great speakers tonight. First, we have Mike, who's going to talk a little bit about arrays, and then we have Austin, who is a co-organizer who is also a first-time speaker. So definitely heckle him as much as possible.
No, the speakers are on.
Are the speakers not on?
Oh, they're on.
They're on. Okay, I just have to talk really close into it. All right, so to get a few things out of the way, first of all, we are recording this and streaming it at the same time. So if anybody who's watching the stream, you can ask any questions that you want, and then we'll forward those questions on. Also, the side benefit is that we'll have a recording of this on YouTube right afterwards. So I'll put that into the meetup page so you can all come back and watch this again later. Also, we have a couple of sponsors here. So first of all, for the space and the drinks, we can thank Code Talent. Is there anybody from Code here?
No, they all left.
No, they all left. They usually do leave. And then for the food, the pizza and the salad, we can thank Google.
Yeah. What do they do?
I don't know what they do, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I use them every day. So you didn't come out here to just hear me talk. So I like to introduce you to Mike.
Yeah.
I don't need pity claps. All right. How y'all doing tonight? Good? How many, for you, is this your first time at Node? Sweet. This is good. How many of you came here because, like, you're in Galvanize and then your instructor was like, you got to go to these events? Oh, man. One guy. Take that. All right. Austin's up here. So, what I want to talk to you about today is some like JavaScript array methods. So, like, got this cool title here: "What to do when you don't care about finding items in an array." So, really, like, what do you care about? The genesis for this talk came at my last job. I was working with another engineer on my team, and we were just like trying to figure out, we need this certain item out of this array. So do we use index of, last index of? We also got these other cool things from ES 2015 that we can use. Do we want to use one of those? And really, it just kind of came down to, like, we weren't really sure which one we wanted, and we also weren't sure which one was best for the situation that we were in. And I was like, hey, let me make a talk on that, and I'll get back to you. So now here we are, talking about all of these sweet, sweet, sweet methods. But before we talk about that, a little bit about me. So I'm Mike Frazier. I'm a software engineer at Quizlet. We are hiring. Talk to me after. Thank you, Kevin. So I did Hack Reactor Remote. I'm a former educator. I recently picked up skateboarding. That's new as of last year. I do music stuff and junk. You know, that's all good. If you want to see some old tweets of mine, because I don't update it all that often, that's me, at @afrageguy. If you're on Denver Devs, how many of you know what Denver Devs is? How many of you are on it? If you're not on it, get on it. It's a great place to be. Message me after this. I'm at Frazier. Pretty easy to remember. I also have a blog, much like my Twitter account. Rarely updated. But go to MikeDoesCoding.com and, send me a message. Tell me that this is all good. This stuff might show up one day as a blog post. I may have also committed it to someone else, but, whatever. Not my problem. So as I mentioned when we did this, there's a lot of different methods that you can use. There's index of, last index of, some, which are all from ES5. So that's kind of like traditional JavaScript that we have right now. But then ES6, which was 2015 update, and then since then they've added a few more. There's these other methods, find index, and includes, that you can also use on arrays if you need to find something sort of specific. They all have their benefits. Some of them have their, things that you want to consider before you actually use them. So we're going to kind of dive into all of those. Just real quick about these examples. I tried to keep it pretty easy, so it's a lot of sort of primitive lookups. So that's like looking at strings, booleans, numbers, those types of things. If you try to get into, object sort of lookups, it gets a little bit more tricky because, I could get into it. Maybe I'll save that for the end. But at any rate, I created a REPL with some of those examples that sort of show how you can get around some of the considerations that will come up in this talk. So just keep that in the back of your noggin. Come back to the slides. I'll put them out there. Okay, are you ready? Ready? Yes? Yes? Yes. Yes, here we go. So let's just say I just care about getting back the index of this thing that I'm looking for, right? I just want the index. Here we go. This is easy. Array prototype index of, array prototype last index of. Super easy, ES5. So here we go. Returns the index of the thing if you find it. Index of, found it, got it, nailed it. It returns -1 if it doesn't find it. All right, so that's kind of an easy check. Hey, is my index that I just found greater than 0? Greater than or equal to 0? Because it might be the first thing. That's awesome. Easy check, and then you can move on. Things you want to be aware of. This is only really good for primitive values, strings, booleans, numbers. This operates on a strict equality check, so that's the triple equals. So the number 1 is different than the string 1. And when I say 1, I mean the actual number 1 with quotes around it instead of ONE with quotes around it. If you try to look for NaN, you're going to have to look somewhere else. This one won't do it for you. It's just a real piece of work. How many of you are familiar with index, last index of? All right, sweet, so that's everybody. So this example shouldn't be, too tricky. You can all read it, right? Okay, so if we just take that array, index of 3, it gives us back 2. Last index, it starts at the very end of the array and works towards the front. So if you have 2 3s in there, it'll give you the one that's the second one, or whatever's closer to the end. If you have something that's not in there, we get -1. And then just to sort of, drive that point home, if you try to use this on something more complex, like I want to find this object with an ID of 2, it's not going to find it. We can talk about that later, or you can look at the examples to see how we sort of get around that. With ES 2015, ES6 Plus, we now have this new thing called find index. This one is actually really, really sweet. Again, it gives you back the index of the thing that you're looking for, but instead of being just a value, right? So instead of just looking for 3, we can say, I want to find, and then we have this comparator function that we can pass in, and this will go over every index, take in whatever value is there, and then run this function on it, and then you can do your comparison inside of that function. This still returns -1 if you don't find anything, so again, very similar to index of and last index of. We'll see an example here in a second. Considerations, because there's always something. This will only give you back the first item that passes it. So if you have multiple items that would pass your comparator, it will only give you back the first one. If you want all of the ones that pass back, there's a different method that we can get to, or that we can use, but that's later on in the slides, so don't worry. I'll get there. Some of you probably already know what it is, but we'll get there. something that I found while reading through the documentation on find index is that it goes through every index of the array, even ones without values assigned to them. So if you make an array of 100 spots, but then you only put a value at index 50, and then you call find index, it will still go through 0 and 49, and then even after that, even if those spots don't have any value assigned to them. So something to kind of be aware of. Is that likely going to happen to you? Probably not, because you're probably getting it from a web server that's giving you back, an array of users or whomever, right? Whatever. You got to check for nan. Be explicit in how you check for nan. So the example that we have here, we can see that we have an array of objects with just an ID and a color. Find index, where we have this comparator this comparator function that says I want to take, for every item that we have here, look at the color, and if it's blue, then we want that to return true, and then that's the item that we want back, right? That's the index of what we want back. So with this item color equals blue, we get an index of 1, which makes sense. That's the second item in our array there. If we look for something that's not in there, like an ID of 4, right? This item with an ID of 4, we get -1. This also works on primitive values, so it's not just for complex things. You can use this also for primitives. If we're just looking for stars in our heart, stars, horseshoes, and clovers array, we'll find it, and there we go. So if you want to find an item in your array just based on the index of, last index of. If you think that it's going to be a little bit more complicated, go with find index, because this gives you a little bit finer control over what you can actually check for. But now let's just say that you're above just having the index, right? That's just, ugh. I have to actually then go back to my array and be like, give me this array at this index, ugh. Just give me back the item, right? I just want back the item. Just give me back that ball of socks, right? Whatever. ES5 doesn't give us any way of actually doing that explicitly, but ES6+, we now have this Array.prototype find. This gives you back the actual item, again, that passes the comparator function. So a lot like find index, we get the finer grained control over what we're actually checking for, so then we can get back the item that we're interested in. It gives you back undefined if you don't find anything, so that's pretty convenient. Much like find index, we only get the first item that passes the comparator. It hits every index, even those without an assigned value. And you're probably going to see a theme going here. Nan is just a real hard thing to check for, so you're going to have to make sure that you check explicitly around that. That seems very inconvenient that it puts a scroll bar right there. So again, we have for our array these same items, right? IDs and colors. If we want to find this item color that's red, we pass in that comparator function that gives us the thing that we actually want to check. We have to return a Boolean out of that, and we get back that actual item from the array. We get back that reference. If we look for something that's not there, we get back undefined. It's like the examples almost match exactly what this thing does. It's amazing. And again, this works for primitive values, so if you want to do this against strings, numbers, booleans, whatever it might be, it works the same way. Feeling good so far? Yeah? Thumbs up, just a bunch of head nods. Oh man, this is like teaching all over again. Yeah? Give me one thing that you've learned so far. Because this is like killing me up here, just talking to myself. Austin. Objects do rule. Yeah, objects, maps, yeah. Who's using arrays anymore? Just up here wasting mine and your time. All right, so
We're talking about Quizlet, right?
What?
You're hiring?
Yeah,
That's all.
let's go back to that.
Quizlet's hiring. Okay.
Quizlet is hiring. Talk to me after this.
I'll find you after this.
Okay, that sounds very ominous. So we can get back the index of the things that we want. We can get back the actual items of the thing that we want. The other thing that we might want to do is to just say, like, I just care that my blue shirt exists in the array of my closet. And guess what it does? I'm so excited by this. There it is, I found my blue shirt. So, we have one method each for ES5 and then ES6+. ES5, we get Array.prototype.some. This returns true or false if the item is, exists within your array. And again, you get to use a comparator function. So I've mentioned that a lot. You get to have that fine-grained control over, I want this object with this property being this value, or I want it to be this primitive value, and you get to have that really fine-grained control over what it's actually going to check. One of the benefits of sum is that as soon as it returns truthy, it exits the loop. So it doesn't, if you've got a million items but it finds it on index 2, it's going to stop there. It's going to give back control to the rest of the program, and it's not going to check the remaining whatever a million minus 2 is, right? That would be a waste of time. That'd be a waste of cycles for your computer.
That was true of the other two before that too, though.
Is it?
Find and find index, absolutely. Return as soon as they're satisfied.
Oh boy. Well, now you're making me look bad. Thank you for pointing that out. No, I did not get that from the docs, so thank you. I will check back on that because that sounds like something that I should have included.
What's the point?
Of what? So the comment was that find and find index, as soon as it discovers something that is true, that your comparator comes back as true, it breaks the loop and gives back control. So if you have all of those things, it will stop checking the rest of the array. That would have been a good point to include. That's just add that to the tally of why you should use those ones. The other thing about sum is that it skips over indices without assigned values. So again, if you have this million item array, but there's only a few items sparsely populated through it, it will skip over the ones that don't have an assigned value, which is pretty cool. The only consideration that I really found looking through the documentation, and this is something that I don't know how it would happen, but I also might not be smart enough to figure out how to make it happen, is that if you have your array and then you call sum on it, but then somehow you begin to add more items to it or removing items from it, it will use that initial array reference instead of whatever you're doing to manipulate it now. So if you can figure that out, let me know, because I'm very curious about that. And I want to hear your ideas of how to do that. So with sum, again, this should read a lot like find and find index, where we just have our array.sum with a comparator of we want this item that is blue, and we do, or a color that's red. Apparently I decided to change everything halfway through my slides. So I just want to know, does this array contain an item with a color of red? And it does, because that's the first thing that's in there. Do we have an ID of 4? That's not in there, so that's false. Also works with primitives, right? So this is a very flexible type of method that you can use for complex objects to primitives. ES6+ gives us includes, which is great. It gives us it returns a true or false if that item is found in the array. Something interesting about this is that it uses this thing called the same value 0 algorithm for comparison, and I've included a link to that in the slides. It's kind of like strict equality, where it's a triple equals check, but triple equals doesn't equate -0 and +0 to being the same, but the same value 0 does, and also nan is nan. So this time we win. You don't have to check for nan on this one. Is nan included in this array? Yes, it is, if it's there. Otherwise, it's false, right? That makes sense. The only consideration really for this one is that because we don't have a comparator function, it's really only good for your primitive values. So here, if we have this array that includes nan, does this array include 3? Yes, it does. Does it have 7? No. Does it include nan? It does. Don't have to do anything special there. Super proud about that one. Does it work with this array of objects? No, it doesn't. So that's no good. Cool? Cool so far? All right, so now, like, you know, I bet some of you out there are like, I could do all of this with reduce or filter or something else. And you know, that's like pretty cool, right? You can be pretty snobby about that. I do all of my mappings with reduce. I do all of my filtering with reduce. I do all of my reducing with reduce.
How about all of your sums with reduce?
I also do all of my sums with reduce, all of my maxes with reduce. I'm not moving on from this. So, you know, like I want to talk about it, and I will, because I think I have time. But really, like, with the other methods that we've gone through so far, I feel like those are a bit better. Those are a bit better to use in some use cases. That filter and reduce just, you know, don't necessarily, you know, work for you. How many of you have used filter or familiar with filter? So yeah, so really, like, you know, I'm just going to do the considerations here. Good job, you used filter. You have another array of things, which is sort of not the point of this talk. The point of this talk was to get something out of the array, not another array of those things. And you also have to check for nan. So, you know, there's also that. Yeah, so, you know, again, like, if you want to filter this array that we have to just the items that are of color red, you get back an array with a single item in it of that object where the color is red. I don't know. Why not just use find, right? Yeah.
What if it has more objects with color red than one?
Well, I mean, that's another thing. Now you've got multiple things that have maybe more IDs than what you want, right? So you have ID of 1 that's color red, ID 7 that's color red. Is that really what you want, or do you just care about getting back an item where the color is red? Again, there are workarounds to this, right? Just do index sub 0. I mean, whatever. Like, I wouldn't do it, but that's me. And again, here we go, reduce. I do all of my reductions with reduce, and all of my summations with reduce, and all of my subtractions with reduce. Really, like, you have to do everything with this. You have to know exactly what you want to do. You can get back whatever you want, which is the power of reduce. If you want to take this array and have it come back as a Boolean or whatever, yeah, do it. I mean, great. You're only limited by your imagination. That's it. And you also have to check for nan. That's the other thing, too. Yeah, so you can reduce this. You can get all of this stuff, writing reduce functions, writing the callbacks to reduce functions always sort of give me pause, because I sometimes forget accumulated value versus current value, which one is first, which one is second. I feel confident that I got it right this time. I'm going to move on before anybody can actually fact check me on that one. But now, you know, like, maybe you're just that person on your team that's always like, I think that we can always squeeze out a few more milliseconds, you know, out of this. Like, we can trim this down. We can make this more performant. Cool. Yeah. That's not been my focus in the past. I don't have a lot to say on that, and What sucks is that I did actually come up with examples for performance stuff, but then the website that I was using got rid of the links that I was using. So I know it says coming soon, and that's because it did exist, but now it doesn't. The good news is that I didn't close my last tab, the for loop and find. So like, thank goodness for laziness on that one. So just to give you an idea, there's just like, this JS bench website. Set in your boilerplate stuff. And this is really just sort of, I took a for loop and then a find, and I just want to see which one is faster. I think that it's 100 items in there. They're each looking for the same ID, or whatever this is. So if we run it, for loop is faster. So if you really want to squeeze out as much performance as you can, right? You want to cut down on all of the cycles that you need. I would honestly say that doing the for loop would probably be your best bet. Is it more readable? Is it easier to maintain? I doubt it, but that's up to you and your team. So, just other things to keep in mind. So performance, if you want to do it, for loop it. Otherwise, just deal with maybe the few millisecond hits that you're going to take for doing all of that stuff. So really, summation of this talk, thesis statement of this talk, find your freedom. Find your freedom with finding things in an array. You now have, 8 different methods that you can use to get items out of an array. Follow your heart. That's what I always do. Thank you. What questions do you have for me? Michael.
So I have used some 4 times in the last week.
Okay.
I'm skeptical that it breaks through.
So the question is more of a statement of, I have used some 4 times in the past week, and I'm skeptical that it breaks early.
Each time. And when I check it, I might as well use like this.
Is there a question?
Man. Sorry.
No question on that one. Michael doesn't like using some, apparently. That's the question, and I disagree.
Does anyone else have the same experience?
No, some rules, man.
I don't believe some is gonna exit early. If it returns true.
Oh, absolutely does.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't question it.
Yep.
I could probably come up with a JS bench that would maybe prove it.
I mean, you can just
Maybe.
check that it hits every index or not, and log the index that goes through.
That's true. I like that idea.
What was the
So in your comparator, while you're doing sum,
yeah.
if you were to log out the index, so this will take the item and the index, so you can log out the index and then see if I know that this item is at index 2, if it stops at 2, it's working. Link up with this guy. What else? What else we got? Yes, sir.
Could you just run down which of the 6 that you started with, which of those took comparators?
Yeah. So the comparators here are in sum.
What was the question?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the question is, of the 6 that we sort of covered tonight, which ones take comparator functions? So the answer is sum, find, and find index.
Thank you.
That's not on the list. It's not on the list. But filter and reduce also take, callback functions. It's a little bit different, I guess.
Second question, because you were, big up in reviews earlier.
Yeah.
How does that bench next to the for loop?
I don't know.
Okay.
probably benches pretty strongly, or probably not. I don't know. It's like, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know what's going to beat a for loop. Any other questions? There's one more back there. Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you use sets for finding? I know they have unique values, but
Yeah.
I've used them to kind of find something quickly. It's like has, and then it just tells you whether it has it or not. So it's a quicker way to like delete, remove, add, like check to see if it has it.
Yeah. So the question is, what would possibly be better to use, a set versus an array?
Yeah. For finding values.
For finding a value, I haven't checked which would be faster, but I have a feeling that behind the scenes a set is really just like an object, and it's doing like a zero, like a constant time lookup of what's in there. If you wanted to take your array that you're getting from your server and turn it into a set, that would be quick-ish. You're still kind of doing a mapping of turning this array into a set. So you're, kind of, what would you rather spend your time doing? The conversion or just doing the lookup? Yeah. Last question. Austin?
You done?
Yes, Austin, I am done. All right, thank you. Austin is anxious.
Stop trying.
All right, so between talks, we're going to take 5 to 6.5 minutes, and you can get pizza.
Starting now.
Starting now, I guess. So grab some more pizza, grab some more beer, say hi to your neighbor, and then Austin is going to be talking about Reactix.
Yeah, Austin!
That's cool. It's awesome to see you. Man, do that.
I'm taking it first. He's taking it first for the good part.
He's leaving too.
I'm heading older here. Oh, 12 minutes. Well, no, I live in L10, 11. I don't know if you're fans, but it's scope. Yeah, there you go. Where you connect? That's okay. Like Doc? Exactly. Yeah, right. But it would be. This is the most amazing thing to actually have. That's good, you know? Cool. Being a team, So he's, but yeah, he's like different ways to happen. So we talked about you. And I was like, cool. So I feel like you were like go or like something like that. You were to go. I was so close to working. Yeah, I know like traveling. I heard that. I'm crazy like friends with like yeah, he's in the same spot now. Like he's I don't think he's ever been like. Okay. Well, yeah, he's not somewhere. I know you use few more guys. It's good seeing you. Yeah. Buddy.
So we're gonna be on it. I'm really excited about
It's been going well, but it is just like proof of concept sort of thing. So like, we have a board meeting next week, so either it goes well and like we'll grow and they'll give us budget for more, and like, oh yeah, we want to invest in it, or we're like, oh dude, so they think of like Airbnb for like internships. So like really like nurse, like all this like big ass shipping companies, like this guy's own their own ships and rent our ships. So like that's they just like so crazy. It's like any kind of industry. Exactly. It's just sort of the same concept. Just rent it. Just make sure you watch it before you rent it.
So I I wouldn't do that to like people who are, but that's like the best thing.
Just rent it out to get it tested out. Especially if even like should we just borrow one for a bit, see what that's like.
I don't care.
Let's go. Ready?
If I can feel right,
When you get to like, I do this, keep at it, man. Like, I think somebody that overloaded, they just stop doing it. Keep doing the way it breaks. Thinking about like the tiny
Yeah, so, yes, it starts off just like nobody cares if I sit down.
No, just that. I might. Oh, do you want to do something? Yeah, you can announce yourself.
Hey, everybody. Hey. Give it up for Mike in the race. How about that? All right, happy you guys enjoyed it, seems like. Mike, you got half of them. You got half of them. My name's Austin. I'm up here talking about React hooks shortly. I didn't really plan this, but I was going to ask, how many people have heard of React hooks? Everybody knows what's going on. Has anybody actually used them, not in production or anything, but practiced with them? We got a couple. Okay, good, because this is pretty bare bones rundown. If I have time, I'll get into some more complicated stuff. But at first, it's like kind of bare bones. This is how you use it. First off, about me. I'm Austin. I like JavaScript. I've been doing freelance for about 2 years now. I love the mountains. That's why I moved to Denver. Anyway, to get up them and down them, mountain bike, snowboard, running, in a van. I would consider myself creative-ish. There's more creative people out there than me. I know that. But probably the most creative person in my family, which isn't saying much. And also, I've fallen asleep to a Radiohead concert before, is a random fact.
Fucking bullshit.
I know. That's kind of a family inside joke. It's his favorite band, and I like him too. I'm not against Radiohead. I was just really soothed and tired. And bored. Okay, learning objectives, Mike. Thank you. All right, first of all, we're going to look at the pitfalls of React. I imagine most people are familiar with React, whether you've been doing it for a month, 3 months, years, or whatever. You're pretty familiar with some pitfalls. I'm going to go over those, and those are why hooks have been implemented in this latest release. Oh, by the way, hooks are available. If you do create React app with the newest version, they're in there. I don't know when that happened, but it was fairly recently. Awesome. Next, we're going to go to the basics of hooks, just kind of what they look like, and then we're going to familiarize ourselves with the basic hooks, and I say that as use state and use effect. All in all, there's 10 hooks, but I think those are the most powerful right off the bat, coupling with custom hooks, which I'll get into later. We're going to go into the knowledge about the rules surrounding them, and once you know the rules, the syntax looks kind of funny, but once you know the rules behind the way hooks work, it kind of makes sense and it kind of makes it easier. After that, we're going to go into custom hooks, and after that, we're going to look into an example of a custom hook, which kind of puts everything together. If I have time, we can look at use reducer, which I think is really cool. It's another favorite hook of mine. It's kind of like the React killer, or the Redux killer, I feel like. We'll see if we get into that. So first of all, pitfalls of React. I'm sure most of you have used higher order components or render props before. I have before, and I think they just feel like they're magic tricks. Once you learn how to do it, you just kind of want to do it again. Once you figure it out and know the innards, it's awesome, but it just adds so much complexity to your application, especially as you add more render props and get nested components, and you just got to worry about a lot once you try to restructure an app and try to implement these things. Component logic, with the class methods right now, you are pretty much separating related logic into lifecycle methods, which isn't a really good practice in general, but it kind of works for smaller components, but as they get bigger, it can get really complicated. And so After that, we have classes. I'm sure, I started with Java before I went to JavaScript. And when I went to JavaScript, I was very excited that classes weren't there, and then React came along. And it's just like, it was bad. I didn't like it, but as you get used to React, it just becomes normal, and it's not a big deal. So anyways, just leave that up for a second. It's like, you guys know the feeling, Zero. There we go. I had a countdown in the back for you guys. All right, so the basics of hooks. Hopefully this is just like an easy rundown. They're just functions. They act just like functions. It's JavaScript. It's great. There's no weird, big React library framework kind of happening in the background. So if you just kind of grasp that, kind of makes it a little easier. And the big reason for hooks, it's adding functionality to your functional components. The big thing with React is use a class component only when you have to. Use a functional component whenever you can. So now, just use functional components. And it's amazing. What I like about this, it changes it from JavaScript changes it from React to JavaScript. If you're looking at these components and classes and whatnot, a lot of stuff makes sense. But when you look at stuff with hooks, it all works like JavaScript. It's awesome. And again, we get rid of classes. It's awesome. Back to JavaScript. And the big thing, it allows the reuse of stateful logic, which used to be a really hard thing, like I mentioned before, higher order components and render props. Not bashing render props too much. I really like that, but my experience with higher order components, they're great, but if you don't look at it for 2 months and then you come back to it and have to refactor something or add something, it can become a nightmare. So the first hook we're going to get into, I think the most basic, is use state. This is a pretty heavy slide, so you guys just take it in for a second. Use state just adds local state to your functional component, which you didn't have before, and that's awesome. And also the state is preserved. So I'll kind of get into this a little later when I show you an example a little later. I mean, I'm probably like 45 seconds. When a component is re-rendered as a functional component that's using use state, you have that state from before it preserves. And I'll kind of get into where that's going. So this is a component you guys should be familiar with. Just basic state, basic handle click instance, and your render function, render method. Something this small, I just feel like should be a functional component, but you just needed that one little piece of state. And sometimes it was difficult, there was workarounds and whatnot. But essentially, this isn't too hard. It's a contrived example. But let me into your life cycle, says the functional component. So here's the same one with hooks. So getting into this, can you see my mouse, right? Mouse? Mouse. All right, all you gotta do, it's already built into React. You just import use state right here. And you call it right here. And that's about it. But then there's more. So this right here, the one argument use state takes, it only takes one argument. This is your initial state. You can put whatever you want in here. You do Boolean, int, string, function, object, anything your linter won't underline will probably go in there. That's fine. I'm not going to get into destructuring, but this is essentially a destructured array that comes out of use state. This first variable here that's coming out is going to be your state variable that you can use within the app. This next one, set clicked, this is going to be like your set state for this piece of state. Use it just like you would any other variable. Let's see, where do I have it?
Disabled.
Yeah, so disabled clicked. Once you do the click, simple function, set the clicked, true. That changes the state to true. And then this button is disabled. It's a one-time click. Very real world. I'm sure all you guys have this in your repos somewhere. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to say? Yeah, so if you're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, state, you get one piece of state that you get to play with. Well, that's not true. You can have two. You can use it multiple times. You can use it 100 times. The logic in here isn't to, don't worry about that. The whole point of this slide is you can use state multiple times. As many times as you want, you use it 100 times. Every instance of this use state method has its own state. I'll get into some rules in a little bit, but essentially, as long as all these use state calls are called in the same order every time, don't have to worry about anything. So that's pretty great. I was very excited the first time I saw that. It's almost the feeling getting rid of classes was just like one of the highlights. So anyways, the next one I think is really important is use effect. This adds the capability of using side effects in your components, which is awesome. This is also something that was stuck in the class component world. And what this does is kind of gets rid of your lifecycle methods or implements them into the functional component. So in this use state call, you have access to, not directly, but you're able to utilize component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount in one function. So all this logic that I was saying that was separated and whatnot, now we can have that all in one. There's also a little tidbit that there's a second argument in this that will be utilized for your component did update that will compare a variable, and that'll make sense in just a second. So I couldn't fit the whole component on here because life cycle stuff is ridiculous, but this is the gist. Hope you guys all get this. So right in here, component did mount and component did update. Take note of this diff right here. It's very common in component did update. So common that this is pretty much what is happening under the hood in use effect. And component did mount, obviously that happens every time. And then it couldn't even fit component did, or component will unmount. But all that is compiled down to this. So the use effect method is just one call. Its first argument is a function. And this will fire every time the component re-renders. So this is your component did update. What's that?
Oh no, you're right, renders. Sorry.
Yeah, so component did mount and component will update. This will fire. But like I said, the little argument, the diff, this variable right here, you can stick in an array at the end. This is totally optional. Everything highlighted right here is optional. If this is gone, this will re-render every time the component's re-rendered. But you can diff it, and you can only have it focus on certain things, and you can have a whole array of things that it can focus on, which is absolutely amazing. And that's the basics right now. Is there any questions I can clarify, or something I missed or skipped over too fast, something that was weird?
So yeah, it's use effect is a way to kind of approximate component did mount, but if you don't want it to run every render, then you're gonna have to give it the memoization callback.
Yes. And
Argument.
yeah, this can come from props. This can be pretty much any variable, and anytime this re-renders, whatever this variable is, if that changes, it'll fire. And if it doesn't, it'll just skip right over. It's amazing. I have a good example of use effect, and this is also used in custom hooks, which I think we're about to get into. So here's the rules, which kind of, I think, help make these basic methods kind of make a little sense. Like I alluded to before, they must be called at the top level. This is the top level. Like I said, you can use it as many times as you want, but it just has to be in the same order, and they got to be the first thing. Maybe you can make a variable right here, but I would put all your use states at the very top if you can. Next, hooks cannot be called in conditionals or loops. Let's see if I have an example of that, right? Oh, that's a little jumbled. But anyways, here's the use state method. That's fine. We have a conditional right here with, let's see, the use state right here, and also use effect. Just don't do that. You can't do it. You can still use conditionals and loops. You just have to restructure a little bit, and it's not a big deal. It's just, you gotta be a little more thoughtful when using these, but not as thoughtful as using hierarchical components or render props. It's not that hard. It's just like few rules and you're good. After this, they can't be used in classes because you don't want to use classes anymore. Just dead. There's still reasons for classes here and there, but mostly functional components are ruling. There's also a naming convention when it comes to custom hooks, which I keep alluding to, and I promise I'll get to. Essentially, React has come out with linter to help you deal with some of these rules. And if you use a custom hook, it advises you to use use in front of it. This helps the React linter find these custom hooks and apply the hook rules to that function. So, any questions on that? Make sense? Okay, so the reason for these two right here, the conditionals or loops and at the top level, is when useState is called, this variable is stuck into an array. This variable is stuck into an array. They're separate arrays. But when this component re-renders, it does not look at any of this. It doesn't look at any of this unless something here is changed, unless this has been called. It goes straight to the array that it's been pushed into. And that helps for efficiency, but it does add the extra quirk where it can't be inside any conditionals or loops. So I think that's a really important piece of all this, and that'll really help you, I think, in the future of just grasping that. And so you can't do that. You can do this though, so here's an easy example of how to fix that. It's pretty basic, just kind of put this stuff outside. Again, when it re-renders, this stuff isn't being called again and all this stuff. There's just an array with this stuff sitting in here, so you don't have to worry about efficiency or anything like that. You can use your use effect method, and you put your conditional in there. And I have that argument, if the name changes, it'll only get fired when that happens. So next is custom hooks, which I think is extremely powerful and I think is going to just change the game of React in the near future. It's awesome. So custom hooks is just a function, just like all hooks, but you write it yourself, and inside this, you're going to be using any hooks you want. useState and useEffect are going to be the examples that I'm using. But you're able to share this. You can have this in a separate file and share it amongst different components. So it's almost like having a service or store kind of reduxy. I like it. One really good thing to use it for is fetch calls. You can make a kind of a generalized custom fetch hook with taking URLs and whatnot, and you can kind of share that throughout through your app. This will replace most instances of the hierarchical components and render props. And every time when I'm saying you can share the same function to different components, each time your custom hook is called, that call has its independent state. So you don't have to worry about calling a custom hook and then calling it somewhere else and then messing with your data from somewhere else. Use your imagination with this. It can be extremely powerful. React's even alluded that they have no idea the capabilities that this could change, but it is awesome, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. It is great. So let's see what's next. All right, I'm going to go through an example real quick, but other hooks, use context and use ref. Really awesome if you're into using context or the reference. And use reducer, I think it's great. I'm a huge Redux fan, but if you're doing pet project or you just need some state management and one component, I mean, this is great. And if I have time, I'll get into that. So, can we see? Did everybody read that? Okay. Any idea? Can anybody not read that? Cool. All right, so I have a container, which is pretty much the display for a component. And then I have the component just doing all the hard work. You see with these render props that I'm doing here, it kind of has this perceived hierarchy in the components, which really isn't true. These components are really just on top of each other when they render. And if this is just, all right, my tabs are a little exaggerated here, but these are just two components, and if you get 4 in here, this can be a nightmare. And I'm sure, yeah, it's ridiculous. So anyways, with this component over here, we have our lifecycle methods. We have component did mount, which is calling our setup, doing all this lovely stuff here. I can do a little run through of this. How are we doing on time? You guys are fine. We're doing a little check here. If our screen size changed while we are trying to render this, we just do that check here. We're creating a listener on this state here, and then we add the listener to the media, and then we have the instance of removing the event listener. We have the component did update, component will unmount, all this stuff, very React-y. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this and just used to it. So there's a huge difference when you implement the hooks, and for the container aspect, it turns to that. If you're comparing these two, I mean, this is just way cleaner and way more readable. It's just simple. So here's my call for the custom hook. I'm giving it its argument here, and ta-da! That all this says 50 lines, but take out the comments. We'll go to 40, and this goes to about 20. So it's about half the amount of code, and it's still just as legible here. This argument right here that's coming in, take it in just like that. Create it just like a normal function. Right here, we're using useState. Like I said, this is the state. It's going to be for the custom function, and this is your set state. And right here, our useEffect is pretty much taking over our component did mount and component did unmount. So we can do it all right here. And here is our component did unmount. This is our component did update. This is our diff. It's all in just one little array right there, which is great. So I don't really know how else to get into this unless you guys have any direct questions about this code. Anybody impressed? Anybody happy? You're happy. That's good. Any question? You just stoked?
There's like a link we can look at this for later, because this looks really useful.
Yeah, so there is. This is a repo of mine. I did a blog post with most of this information in it, and we'll put it on the meetup site. This goes through most of the stuff that I went through, maybe a little bit more detail. At the end of it, it has a link to this repo. I'll just show you guys this real quick, just so you know what to expect when this happens. It's pretty simple. I also have that one-click demonstration at the beginning. This is a basic example. What I just showed in the slide, this is the class component, and this is the hooks component. They're both right here in the app, which work. So it looks like I'm running something already. Let's do this. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good timing.
That's not the right app. It's here somewhere, I promise. Think of some questions for me or something. Here it is. Okay, so I don't know what's in the background here, so bear with me. I believe this should work. Yeah, as you can see, the small, large change. Once you get small, it's medium, and big. So these are both the components, hooks and hooksless, and we also have the buttons up here, click once, and all the functionality is the same. It's just way less code and more readable. So yes, I will have a link to this repo. Also, this is the other very, I would say, much heavier hooks-driven app right here. A simple slideshow. You can go through these 3 slides. This is a little component. You can pick the slides. You can press play, and it's a little animation until it goes to the next one. If you stop it, you can stop it or stop. If it's playing and you want to go back, it stops playing. Next. Okay, anyways, it's not playing. And that, do we have time for a little bit of user reducer? Does anybody want to see it? Yeah? I could get into a little bit of depth on it, but is this it? This is it. Okay. Whew, yeah, this is a lot. So this is about 270 lines here. This is just one giant app or whatever. Make it bigger?
Yeah. Switch to a light pink too. That'll help.
I don't know how to do that. We're not gonna waste my time. Is that okay?
Yes. Yep.
You good? Okay, so right in the app, right here, this function, it's a lot like all the other hooks, use reducer, but it's taking in state and it's taking in an action. Most people familiar with, raise your hand if you're familiar with Redux, you like it and you use it. Okay, so this should pretty much make somewhat sense to you. This essentially is having, to me, Redux in just a component, if you have a large component. I haven't done it yet, but I imagine if you use this in a custom hook of some sort, you can kind of share this all around, and Redux is kind of F'd in the A. So anyways, you have a function here, state and action, and it goes right into your reducer right here. It has all this kind of stuff. It acts just like any other switch statement. There's nothing special that I can see. It's just a reducer. And you call them the exact same. So if we're looking for progress, that's all up in a use effect. But anyways, you can just dispatch all these actions, which is amazing if you're having an app this big. And we'll do a CJ. Let me just stretch real quick. This is my break timer. I feel like everybody should have one of these on the computer. So, or nobody stretch. All right, fine. Skip it. God. This also has render props in it, which is cool. And so all these hooks are not trying to totally replace what you know. I think render props are awesome, and this is an awesome example of how you can tie these things together. High order components, I'm not too keen on, but I'm sure there's still plenty of use cases for them. But essentially, that's the gist of use reducer. Oh, one more say. So you got your state, you got your dispatch. The second argument, just like you had on use effect, so you have this one big function that's taken in the switch statement to here. Your second argument is your state. So on first render, you can give it everything you need right here. And I guess, yeah, we'll send out this link. You guys are going to go through this. There's all kinds of little cool tricks in here. It's great. Is there anything specific you guys want me to go over, or any other questions you want me to try to answer? Did I do a great job? Does everybody kind of understand hooks a little bit? What's up?
Can you only call use effect once per component?
No. Use effect, I believe, will have the same thing as your custom hooks. You should be able to have multiple, like this has multiple use effects in it. I'm not sure exactly on this app if the same use effect is called multiple times, but I'm pretty sure each hook call, I know this for use state, and I think I said that in use effect. Let's see, we'll just let that go.
I honestly may have missed it.
Yeah, it's totally cool. Like I'm pretty sure.
I think
Yeah.
that Dan Abramoff said on Twitter at one point that you're not supposed to use like multiple use effects, that you're supposed to just keep them in one.
Okay.
And then I could be wrong, maybe,
Yeah.
but I seem to recall something about that.
Yeah. Also, there's been not a lot of changes on this, but there has been some. They've had some different feelings on how to use this stuff from when they first talked about it from a couple
And we're
months
still
ago to
finding out
now.
the patterns that work well, because like it's still so new that like
Yeah, and they've alluded to, like, there could be some crazy things you could do with this that they just don't know yet, that people just haven't used. I read a post somewhere, this guy saying, oh, you can use it for this, and that just wipes out something. So do your due diligence and just look up awesome things effects can be used for or whatnot. Is there any other questions I can answer? What's up?
Would you say the limitation of use reducer is like a matter of scale, or what would you not recommend using use reducer?
I would not recommend it in a large app. This is right off the top of my head. I kind of suspected a question like that, but I haven't used this tremendously. I haven't put it in I haven't put this in a custom function yet, the use reducer, but I imagine if you just have like a half dozen components that need state, I would, well, so when you're using Redux and you have a reducer kind of for each different store that's meant together, you can have your own store for each component, and you don't have to worry about having one big piece of state, which I'm not saying you shouldn't have one piece of big state, but it is really useful, I think, for small and medium-sized apps and whatnot. I don't think there's any limitation on how big you can make one use reducer function call be. I think you can make this as just about as big as you want, as long as you can read it and handle it.
Okay, so that's the difference between Flux and Redux, because Redux is just a single store, and then Flux has multiple stores for various reasons.
Yeah.
That's a lot more like the Flux architecture.
Right.
But you can do a Redux provider connect, and hooks, it just takes a little bit more like boilerplate, but you can actually just do it in your app and never use Redux and just get the same functionality.
Yeah, I haven't tried the...
It's with like use context and...
Yeah, does this have use context too? No, this has use reducer, use ref also, which is cool. Use context is a really cool one too. Yeah, I would really like to play with this more. I just have this app using this. I haven't really dove too deep into this, but I mean, this is incredible. Just for something so simple, just something quick, I think it's great. Anything else?
Do you have the use ref in there? Just curious.
Yes, where did I do that? I kind of forget what I did with that. The use ref, whatever reference, it takes the most current reference. It's always there. So instead of, I haven't used ref that much in React myself, but supposedly this is just taking the first ref, and then you can do whatever you want with it.
It's a reference to the element.
Yeah. Anything else? Awesome. Oh, yeah.
With use reducer, what about things like selectors and effects? Is that anything built out to support that?
You know, I don't know. Mostly just managing simple state is all I've really messed with. But I'm sure they've thought about it. I do recommend everybody to go to the docs and YouTube this. I mean, there's so much awesome material on this. People are just grabbing this by the reins and going with it. I think in the next few months there's going to be some amazing things with it, and React is going places now. So, yeah.
So you mentioned defining like your use state in the same order. What does that mean? Like, why is that?
The same order? Okay. Blur. Let's see. So, this will have to be in the same order. Can you say the question again? Just so I can repeat
the same order across multiple different components, or
inside the component?
Yeah. So the question, I've been bad at repeating the question, so just make sure you get it. Why does use state have to be called in the same order? So essentially, what's happening, and you'll see this in the rules if you go look it up. So this is your first piece of state that you're giving to use state, and what React is doing under the hood is it's putting this in an array. And so the next time this is re-rendered, it totally ignores this call, and it just goes to the array. So if for some reason there's an if statement that gets skipped or a loop that's a little different on each re-render, this order is going to kind of mess up, and you're going to jeopardize the functionality of that component and essentially your whole application. So that's just like one of the rules. It has to be top level, up top, and in the same order. That's all you got to do. And just to further on that, the rules, this is what you don't do, like I was saying, because this is going to mess up the arrays that the state's going into. But you can still use this functionality just like this. So you're not being hindered, you just have to put a little thought into it, but not as much thought as higher order components or render props. So, does that answer your question? Anything else? Come on. Am I done? Nothing? Nothing for you? That's fine. Views. way better.
Would you imagine, like, could you imagine of a way to make a connect style method, like with map state to props and map dispatch to props? You're asking about selectors,
Yeah.
and so like I would imagine that there's probably a way to do that, but I don't know if anybody's like made like a use connector, like a connect method for this for hooks, right? Like
And the connect is for connecting to the store?
Yeah.
You're saying? What I think you're asking, trying to come up with a connect method.
To not have to pull in Redux, like kind of while you're on Redux, basically.
Yeah, I think if you used a custom hook with use reducer in it, I think you might be able to use that as your store, and you just have to import that custom hook as use application state, and in there you use reducer, and then you just send as an argument, the same state and action and whatnot. It might be, it's a simplified version of Redux, but I think it's there, and it's way simpler. I think it just takes out, the whole connect store thing, and the barrier to entry just got lowered, I think, to all this Redux. For me, for React and Redux, I love it now that I know it, but that learning curve was absolutely ridiculous.
Do you think there's still a future for people who like to use map state to props and map dispatch to props?
Yes, because it's not like it doesn't work.
Yeah.
All this is backwards compatible. Nothing's gonna break. Everything's still gonna work. If you know React and you like the way you like it, keep liking that. But there's new stuff on the horizon. I don't know any direct instances of when Redux would be a better way to solve a problem. This is more of a high-level discussion on it, and I think for most instances, this is pretty awesome. I do think there is a lot of potential in this rest of the year for big libraries like Flux, Redux, and React Router to kind of harness the power that React just kind of got them with, and either those third-party libraries are going to be easier to use, and maybe they can make it easier than hooks. Could be faster, I don't know. That's one big thing I'm excited about, is kind of what other third-party libraries are going to do to use this. Because I don't think React's idea is to kick everybody out kind of thing, like Redux was their friend, it's their baby kind of thing. And I think they're just trying to make everything better for us. And I think if everybody kind of stays on that track, we'll be all right. Yeah, anyways, Redux is still a thing. You don't need it, but it's still Okay, anything else? Am I done? I did it! Woo! Thank you, guys. Feel free to ask me any questions and talk to me after if you want. Let's go.
All right, thank you everybody for coming on out. We have the space for a little bit of time, but we also have plenty of pizza and salad left, so if any of you want it, feel free to take it.
Oh, by the way, two things. I noticed